Hello and welcome to the Null channel. Kubernetes 128. It's here. It's time for some of the most exciting visual release notes you have seen to date, as we have some pretty exciting features dropping. Well, let's get into it. Let's start with the stats. We have 46 new features this release, though it was actually kind of weighted heavily on the alpha side. At least that's kind of what it seemed to me. Of those 46 features, 20 of them are new alpha features. 14 features moved from alpha into beta, and that means the remaining 12 features are features moving from beta to release. Of the 20 brand new features, 5 of them were actually little Keps that were held back a grade. So we're only going to be talking about 15 of them that are actually net new. Now, I jest a little, but I actually think this is a good thing. Too often I think Keps get rushed through alpha or beta, and there is really no need to rush. Except for the law stating that they have to move quickly or their Keps get killed. So I guess maybe there is a reason to rush, but it's not a good one. What about the top contributors to the project? Well, sadly, Independence again did not make the top 5, sitting again at number 6, missing the top 5 spot by just 4 contributions a week. You're almost there, Independence. You're almost in the top 5. Google, as usual, is at the top with an average of 277 contributions a week, with VMware and Red Hat taking second and third. Microsoft took fourth with an average of 102 contributions, and Deo Cloud Network Technology Co. Ltd. took fifth with an average of 40 contributions, though they did peak up there at 104 one week. Does anyone know what they do? I don't know what they do, but nice work, Deo Cloud. That being said, we averaged 10,000 contributions a week from 1,000 individuals. To be honest, this is kind of staggering. I don't know what they count as a contribution, but that means on average each person is doing 2 contributions per day. I'm assuming this counts comments, reviews, commits, and everything. It must. It just must. Because I know that this means some people are making well over 5 contributions a day, and that can't be commits, for sure. While I don't have an actual section for this, I'm going to slide policy changes in here in the stats as well, as they don't happen that often. As we all know, there are 3 releases of Kubernetes each year, and each minor release of Kubernetes is supported for an entire year. But the version skew is only the minor version plus or minus 2, meaning you can't support the same version for an entire year. Even though Kubernetes minor version is supported for the entire year, your version skew is effectively not. That being said, the new policy is in +3, or minor version +3. So after this change, you should be fine using kubectl version 128 with Kubernetes control plane 131. It's nice. Now, in practice, I have never really struggled with this, and so it's maybe not the biggest of deals, but I understand where this is coming from. When you have many clusters, it can even become possible to have 2 versions of Kubernetes in production, though I really would recommend against that if possible. Anyhow, this is nice, and just another ways Kubernetes is becoming more stable and mature. Solid work, team. Solid work. Let's talk about our deprecations and removals. I know while these are not the most exciting things, they are some of the most important things you need to know when upgrading your cluster, and usually what's going to cause you issues as you upgrade. Now, it's pretty nice. In 128, there is only one. Now, this has been listed in the 128's release page, but the tracking document said it was released in 119, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I should start joining K8's release meetings. Anyhow, this is removing the in-tree GCP, but it appears to have been removed in Kubernetes 119. And then later the docs updated to represent this in Kubernetes 125. And now all I could see was that they closed the issue now, not that it actually did anything with this in the 128 release. Let me know if I'm missing something major here, because I'm a little confused, to be honest, as I tried to look into these and make sure that I'm reporting on a valid thing. And I don't quite understand what happened with this, that it's getting closed in 128. It seems like most of the work has already been done. So hopefully there's nothing to do, as GCP has been already moved out of tree with the rest of them. Let's talk about stable features. That's right, let's talk about all the new things you get to use by default in your Kubernetes cluster as of 128. SIG CLI graduated a single KEP this release, KEP 1440. kubectl events has been released. This is actually pretty good and I'm pretty excited about it. kubectl get events has always had some limitations and it was not possible to extend, leading to the creation of kubectl event. Another plus side I see to this that people are not quite talking about as much as I think they probably should is the fact that you no longer have to type the word git, meaning less typing, which means less aliases. This is a really big deal. Probably not, but seriously, with this, you can now easily filter the events types you wish to watch, see changes to the object, and even watch an object till it's deleted. I might make a note to make a Mighty Mini Monday on this as it looks pretty useful. Let me know down in the comments if you would like a Mighty Mini Monday covering the new events and all the changes that have happened to it over the last several releases of Kubernetes. Let's move on to SIG Storage's contributions to the newest release. There is a retroactive default storage class assignment, KEP 3333. It's fun to say 3333. This KEP is pretty self-explanatory and we have covered it before. I think it's actually a really nice thing to have as it's going to make cleanup of your cluster storage classes easier and, well, actually automatic. So this is just basically letting a default storage class claim things that have been created. SIG Storage second KEP was a little more interesting in my opinion, but also something we have talked about and I'm really excited it's finally released. Non-graceful node shutdown is stable and ready for you to ungracefully shut down your servers. It's pretty awesome. I'm pretty excited about it. Now, mind you, this does not mean you should do this. There are many things we can do that we should not do, but I am not saying to start shutting down your nodes without coordinating them off or anything like that. But if you end up typing reboot in your systemctl command or something like that, not saying that I've done that, or just want to start treating your nodes a little bit more like cattle and would like to reboot them without the extra work, you now can, and it's pretty awesome. As a small little side note here, please note this does not cover nodes that go down to hardware failures or a broken OS. You will still need to manually add and remove a taint of out of service with the no execute effect in these cases. Though they note here that they will look for a more automatic way to deal with these cases in the future when you're not planning on a machine returning to the cluster. At least for a little while. So, go, reboot your machines. Well, after upgrading to 128, that is. SIG Node brought in KEP 606 with support for third-party device monitoring plugins that removes device-specific knowledge from the kubelet and provides a way in the future for other third-party devices. This should let you provide monitoring agents for any device you want to provide, and that's pretty cool. SIG Auth was able to get KEP 3325 into the stable release, bringing the ability for the auth to get self-user attributes. This KEP provides a new API that enables observation of the attributes of the current user after they authenticate. One of the absolute coolest things this is going to let you do is the kubectl auth who am I, letting you get information on how you are accessing the current cluster simply and easily. SIG Network brought it yet again, getting 5 whole KEPs into stable this release. A few are minor things you might never notice, like KEP 3178 and 3453, that cleans up the ever-complex AP table chains ownership and restore input size. It turns out, without the whole Docker shim, none of these things really actually needed to be there, and were able to be removed, cleaning everything up. Of the remaining 2 SIG Network stable releases, there was a KEP 2595 that extends the available configuration of DNS search path. This is behind a feature gate called expand DNS config. I personally have not run into this issue that I know of, but I try to stay away from DNS, to be honest. DNS is part of the reoccurring nightmares of mine along there with Furbies. On the bright side of networking though, KEP 1669 was released into stable that brings a bunch of enhancements to the kube proxy. Okay, maybe a bunch was an overstatement, but really just one. This KEP states that it's an effort to improve the traffic engineering capabilities and overall reliability of Kubernetes. This builds on the work and changes done to endpoints and endpoint slices API in the KEP 1672 The basics of this change is that Kubernetes has historically ignored the terminating pods, and especially the terminator pod. But I guess this is where some cases where there would be traffic that is lost, as some traffic could be routed to these terminated pods or terminating pods. I have linked the issue below so you can read more on this, but it turns out that due to all of these changes, there are improvements on how this can be handled, and it is awesome. Good job, SIG Network. Moving on to SIG Node, they released 2 new features. Keps 2403 adds the ability for third-party consumers to understand the current compute allocation, letting them evaluate the node's capacity outside of Kubernetes. Now, I think this is interesting. I think there are things you could do here for things running outside of Kubernetes on the node. I generally don't recommend running that configuration, but if you are, this opens up a whole world of opportunity. Keps 606, the finalized pod resource API GA graduation. So this new API is the result of all the work to support device-attached nodes. Specifically, this Keps exposed an API that is going to let you match device utilization to a pod. For maybe a little bit of an example, how much GPU is pod X consuming? I love seeing all the support for devices coming to Kubernetes that will bring better and better support to things like GPUs, FPGAs, and the likes. It's pretty awesome, and the machine learning community should be really excited about it. It's pretty awesome. And that's really it for our stable releases. What was your favorite stable release? And next up is Alpha. Let's talk about those features you must not use, but you really, really, really want to use. That's right, let's talk about the new alpha features, our small glimpse into Cluster's future. Let's start with SIG's API machinery's whopping 4 new Keps. But the first Kep in alpha we're going to talk about goes deep into etcd, a place very few dare to venture. Now, I happen to know everyone's favorite thing to deal with is networking, dual stack, and DNS. But right after all that stuff is etcd. Well, thankfully, this change does not require you or me to know anything about etcd, but when you make GET or list requests to the Kubernetes API, it would use quorum read. And as you might guess, those are a bit expensive. So they're improving this to serve most reads from the watch cache while providing the same consistency guarantees as reading straight from etcd. This is awesome and will improve etcd's performance in your cluster as it will be hit less, which is pretty cool, and could actually enable you to have a larger cluster in the end. Keps 4020 is looking to provide you the ability to consistently query resources during a cluster change. If that does not really make sense in that short little statement, let's imagine the event of a cluster upgrade. Some of your control plane nodes could be a new version of the control plane and could have a new resource, or some of the new nodes might have removed a resource version in the deprecations and removals. This means if you were to make a request, it might depend on which control plane node your request was to hit. Now, me personally, this is not a big deal to me, as I'm kind of old school. When you're updating or reconfiguring your cluster, try just not to touch it. Don't touch it. That's just dangerous. But at the same time, this kind of lets you just do things. And so it's pretty nice. But with this Keps 4020, you'll soon be able to just query your clusters to your heart's content while you're upgrading them or changing configuration. And no matter what control plane you hit, you'll be able to proxy your request to a location that has the resource that you need. So it's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. I know that you've all heard about shift left, security, operations. It does not matter. Everyone wants to shift everything on the poor left. And that's true of Keps 4008, CRD validation ratcheting. Going into full detail might take a little bit too much time, but again, remember, if you really want a video on a specific thing, you've got to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment on what you wanted me to make a video on specifically. The goal of this Kep is to make it where validation will now only affect change fields on the CRD in the event you're running Kubernetes with the flag CRD validation ratcheting feature flag. Now, to be honest, I'm interested in this and spent a little time trying to understand the issue, and it seems people struggle to understand when they need to up the version of their API. I'm not convinced this is actually a good thing and would like to see a true shift left where validation is able to be done on the client side. It's a hard problem, to be honest, and I'm looking forward to maybe some help from Cell and how it might alleviate some of these issues. Personally, I think it's really important to understand why and when you should update your API version. So I'm going to keep watching this and trying to understand it better. The worst thing that could happen from this is people don't understand that they actually need to make a new version, but leverage this some way to not make a new version. That would be terrible. This last KEP from API Machinery is a doozy. Let me tell you, the KEP came with its own pretty pictures and everything. So I'm just going to do a nice big picture, and then again, if you need more info and want a deep dive, we'll make it its own video. Effectively, in a large cluster, it's really easy to consume a lot of memory without thinking about it. Now, one of the main culprits of this are informers. Talking about informers, and they are pretty cool, and if you don't know what they are or how they work, definitely 100% leave a comment, as they're important to know and understand. Informers are a primary way to obtain lists, list requests and things like that. As you can see in this pretty graph, not only is it fairly easy to consume a lot of memory, but it also is kind of easy to bring your control plane to its knees with informers. Now, this has security implications as well as usability implications. And in this KEP, through the magic of software engineering, looks to not only protect the API servers, the beating heart of your Kubernetes cluster, but also improve the memory footprint from the O of watchers times page size times object size times 5 to O of watchers times constant. And that's pretty cool. SIG Apps brought 2 KEPs out. KEP 3850, providing a backoff limit per index for index jobs. As stated in the KEP, that Kubernetes currently does not cover the situation where workloads are truly embarrassingly parallel. The example is given a suite of long-running integration tests and things like this, enabling each index to have one index. This is awesome, and I have never run into this problem myself, but I'm sure it's super annoying if you actually have. So well done in fixing this. The second KEP, KEP 3939, allow replacement when fully terminated, adds a new field to the job API that lets users specify if they want the replacement pods as soon as the previous pods are terminating, or if they would want to wait for the pods to be fully terminated. So, previously, as soon as they went into terminating is when they would go, but there is a need for waiting for the pod to be fully terminated first, and that's what this is enabling. To be honest, SIG CLI kind of slacked off this release, releasing only a single KEP 3895. But I have to say, I think it's a pretty cool KEP at that. As the KEP states, kubectl delete is disruptive and irreversible command and should be used cautiously. And this is absolutely why I use it very flippantly and is one of my favorite things to use. I think it's just the thrill of it. When you hit enter, your job is in the hands of that command. It's an amazing feeling. Anyhow, this KEP, they will bring interactive deleting with the, you probably guessed it, the -i flag or -- interactive flag. This is where the user will be shown all the resources they are going to delete. Now, I argue they could just look at the YAML file they are passing to the delete command, but it's still nice, especially if it condenses it nicely for you, as some of those YAML files get really long. After Kubernetes 127, SIG Network decided to take a step back from their monstrous 5 brand new releases and only release 2 new features. KEP 2681 pod host IP, it deals with properly enabling IP-related attributes on a pod to report both IPv4 and IPv6 in the dual stack transition. And the second KEP, 3836, looks to improve ingress connectivity reliability, though after reading through it a bit, I think it will really only affect GCP, at least in the short term. It looks very focused on fixing a GCP networking issue inside of the kube proxy. This release, it was SIG's Node's turn to release 5 brand new cutting-edge features. I think my favorite one by far is KEP 753 sidecar containers. Now, I'm sure you all know the sidecar containers paradigm, how to use them but this is bringing more real support to the sidecars. So now, instead of just init containers and proper containers, you have a third type of container called a sidecar container. This is awesome. It helps formalize how and why you should use sidecar containers and giving them an actual life inside of Kubernetes. Now, I feel obligated to state, be careful with sidecar containers. It's easy to let it get a bit messy, so just promise me, you will not use a sidecar container unless if you really need it, okay? Kep 3983 is bringing drop-in configuration of the kubelet. This will let you deal with the kubelet much like you would many things in Linux and is a fantastic update. The kubelet is part of the host OS, and as the Kep states, it makes sense that you would manage it much like you would manage the rest of the node, including your container runtime. And so this Kep is super appreciated. Kep 4009 added the CDI device-to-device plugin API as an extension of the work that has already been done. This will give you an explicit field to specify the CDI device name, letting the CRI field be used to indicate the device that needs to be injected instead. This will just make a lot of things cleaner, letting you forget the customary container annotations previously used to pass this information. Alright, so just in case anyone is getting confused about the above abbreviations, I know it was even a little confusing for me when I was reading through it. So, here this is. The CDI is the Container Device Interface. The DPA is the Device Plugin API. The CRI is the Container Runtime Interface. So the CDI is to devices what the CRI is to containers effectively. Moving on. Kep 4033 is bringing the ability for the container runtime, think containerd or the likes, to instruct the kubelet which cgroup driver to use. This should not only simplify, but also keep misalignment of the kubelet from really ever happening. In theory, I'm sure somebody will figure out how to do it, but this is pretty awesome. The last thing of all of the SIG's nodes releases is Kep 3085. This will add a new condition, pod ready to start containers, when all the prereq conditions for a container starting have been successfully met. These include things like in-tree volume plugins, the CSI plugins, and the container runtime itself. This should help clarify many things, as Kubernetes already has many pod-specific conditions, things like pod scheduled and initialized. This will help clarify exactly what the pod's latest state is, and is pretty cool and awesome. So in the future, you can expect to see this new condition after everything is ready, but we have not started any of the containers just yet. And the best for last, SIG release is looking to bring a major improvement that very few will fully understand the work or appreciate the effort. But in Kep 1731, an effort to move off Google maintained infrastructure and only deploy to community maintained infrastructure is now truly underway. You can read the Kep for yourself, but there are quite a few reasons why this is, and we have seen effort around this to do things like this, like moving off of GCR.io in 127. Previously, before any of this effort, only Googlers could actually make and cut a release of Kubernetes, which obviously, as a community project, isn't really good. Okay, there's one thing from beta that I think people should know about, especially because I missed talking about it when it was released in alpha in 126. But it looks like it underwent major changes, keeping in alpha in 127, is the addition of swap support. Now, my live streams and I have talked about this, and I have some thoughts from some of the SREs that I've talked to in my past. I know some of my colleagues thought that this was the stupidest thing that Kubernetes did not support swap. Others would have argued that if you properly packed your machines, that swap will only cause your clusters to perform worse. So here's my understanding at this point. Now, I would highly recommend, if you want a video on this, if you want me to confer with some experts and condense these thoughts down into a fantastic educational video on swap, let me know. But here we go. First off, I'm not an expert in swap. Swap basics is just lets you use your drives as memory, and if you're running on NVMe's, this can be really performant. But not quite as performant as memory, but here's the thing. If you know how much memory you're going to use, you should pack your machines perfectly with a perfect pairing of CPU. So if you've perfectly matched your memory with your CPU so that they both complement each other, it's awesome. But a lot of us don't know this exactly and don't have this exactly dialed in, meaning that swap can keep your machine running when you accidentally have a little extra CPU and you have a spike in memory, and that happens. And if you don't have any memory left, you'll get an error and an crash. Whereas with swap on, the OS can make a little artificial memory for a little while. Now, one warning with this here, while swap on NVMe drives are fast, an NVMe drive only supports writing to a single block so many times. So if you are abusing swap, you will destroy your drive faster than ever. Anyhow, let me know if you'd like a deep dive on that, as I could do that for sure, and I just have to talk to some other experts in the area. And I'll make a video on it if it's wanted. And that's it. Let me know in the comments what your favorite feature of Kubernetes 128 is, what you're looking forward to using the most, and let me know how I could make these things better for you. But if you're sitting there and you made it here and don't like these reviews, if you would prefer not to have visual release notes, then please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, stick around, and see how much worse these release notes can get.